Mark adjusted his tie for the 10th time, feeling as if his collar was choking him. He furtively glanced at Sarah across the crowded room. She was radiant in an emerald dress that fit her figure perfectly, emphasizing every line. Her laughter melodiously overlapped the noise of conversations as she chatted with her friends near the bar. Normally, Mark would have felt proud of his wife's ability to attract everyone's attention, but not today. Today, there was something different in his soul, an unsettling, oppressive unease. Tom and Meg, the evening's hosts, had not skimped on the scale of the event. Crystal chandeliers sparkled under the ceiling, reflecting the twinkle of colored lights on the polished parquet floor. The celebration literally screamed of new beginnings and love, which stood in stark contrast to the tension in their own marriage. Sarah had been different in recent months. At first, Mark had written it off to work. She was often late, talking about overtime and emergencies at the clinic. But then came her strange messages, which she quickly hid once Mark got close. Conversations became taut as strings, and even regular evening dinners became silent rituals. He assured himself it was just a rough patch, all couples have them, right? But on this night, something made him think deeper. Her phone in his hand glowed almost constantly, as if there was someone on the other end who could not wait for her to answer. She pretended to watch the messages casually, but Mark noticed how often her eyes slipped away toward the far corner of the hall. He followed her gaze and stopped his breath. Eric, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky grin, as if he knew something important that remained beyond the reach of the others. Eric raised his glass in her direction, and Sarah responded with a slight, almost imperceptible smile before she looked away. Mark felt his knees buckle. "Mark!" Tom's voice brought him back to reality. He was standing in front of him with a glass in his hand, smiling happily. "Look at this. I'm a married man." "Congratulations, Tom." Mark strained to smile. "Meg is lucky to have you." No, I'm a lucky one." Tom laughed and winked. "Thanks for coming over. You and Sarah are like family." "Sure," Mark replied, but his gaze drifted back to the bar. Sarah was not there. Gone. Eric was not there either. The uneasy lump in his chest was growing. He glanced around the room, but did not find her. When the DJ announced the young one's first dance, he felt his heart beat faster. Sarah had disappeared again and again, and this time it was not just another getaway to her friends. After a while, trying not to attract attention, Mark crossed the room, heading for the door at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and muffled voices came from there. He froze, his heart thundering in his chest, filling him with fear and determination. Mark opened the door, slightly ajar. Eric was standing close to Sarah, too close. He whispered something in her ear, his hand sliding along her waist. Sarah threw her head back, laughing, but this laugh was different, quiet, intimate. "Are you sure?" He heard Eric's voice. "It's risky. It's under control," Sarah replied, her voice light and husky. "Mark does not suspect anything." Mark stepped back. The door creaked slightly. Sarah turned around. Their eyes met, and in her gaze he saw something akin to terror. "Mark?" Her voice shook. "Is everything all right?" He asked with feigned ease, trying not to betray the hesitation in his voice. Sarah froze before she could find an excuse, and Eric took a step back, leveling with her as if nothing had happened. "I've been looking for you," Mark continued, slowly averting his gaze. "It was time to come back." Sarah nodded, a smile frozen on her lips, and Mark felt his heart clench with pain and anticipation of the coming revelations. Mark could not sleep that night. The sound of the air conditioner turning on hummed in the background, and the quiet, almost indistinguishable noise from the street seemed to echo his chaotic thoughts. Sarah returned to the room later than expected. She entered, trying not to make any noise, and, assuming Mark was asleep, she carefully removed her shoes and made her way to the bathroom. He heard the sound of the water murmuring lullingly and imagined her trying to wash away the marks of the evening, the marks of deception. Mark kept his eyes closed, breathing evenly, pretending to be in deep sleep, but every cell in his body was alert. After a few minutes, he caught a low, nervous whisper. "Yeah, that was close." Sarah's voice was hoarse, the words intended for someone on the other end of the phone. I know, Eric, I've got this. No, he did not figure it out. Okay, do not call here again. Mark clenched his fists under the blanket. The name stabbed his ears like a knife. Eric. Of course he knew it was not just a chance encounter in the hallway. The urge to act flared inside him, but he realized that jumping to conclusions could hurt more than help. Morning came inexorably, and Sarah looked as if the night had passed uneventfully for her. She stood in front of the mirror applying makeup, her movements smooth and confident. How did you sleep? She asked, catching his gaze in her reflection. Fine, Mark lied, pulling himself up on the pillows. I think we should have breakfast somewhere before we go. Great idea, Sarah replied, lifting the corners of her lips slightly. But her eyes avoided his gaze. There was an awkward silence in the car on the way home. Sarah was staring out the window, and Mark, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white, tried to get his thoughts in order. He did not know how to proceed, but he knew there was no time to lose. That same evening, when Sarah went to shower, he picked up her cell phone. He was lucky. The password had not changed. He quickly scrolled through the messages, and there, among the usual correspondence with girlfriends and coworkers, he found a flood of messages from Eric and another contact signed Josh. Today was incredible. One of the messages from Eric read, "You took too many risks, but it was worth it." Mark closed his eyes, feeling the ground go from under his feet. He quickly sent all important correspondence to his email and put his phone back where it belonged when he heard the shower turn off. The next day, he found contacts online for a private investigator with great reviews. He called Patrick with a tremor in his voice, trying not to snap. Patrick? It's Mark. I need your involvement. I have reason to believe that my wife is cheating on me. Tell me more." The detective's voice was calm and confident, giving Mark some confidence. There are two men. One is Eric, a local doctor. The other is Josh, the owner of a yoga studio. I need proof, so I do not give her a chance to deny it. I see. Do you have any initial evidence? Patrick asked, and Mark could hear him writing something down. Yes, correspondence. I can forward them to you. Great. We start by monitoring her movements and recording any encounters. That should take a few days. Mark nodded, though the detective could not see him. Everything was clenching inside, but now he had a goal to find out the whole truth. A couple days later, when Sarah said she had to stay late at work, Mark knew that was not true. He discreetly followed her car until it pulled up to a small, inconspicuous cafe on the outskirts of town. He parked at a distance and watched as she stepped inside. A few minutes later, Eric joined her. They sat, leaning close together, discussing something. He could not hear their conversation, but he could see the look on Sarah's face, soft, almost amorous, and it made him angrier than he expected. Mark took a couple pictures on his phone, then sent them to Patrick. Later that night, Mark's phone rang. Mark, it's Patrick. I've documented her encounters with both men, including where they are hiding. I've got notes and photos. I'll send you a detailed report tomorrow. Thank you, Mark said. He sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at Sarah, who was lying pretending to be asleep. Everything was falling into place. The secrets, the detachment, her nightly conversations. The next morning, Mark met Patrick at a small cafe. Here's what we have. The detective laid out the photos and pages of statements in front of him. She's seeing Eric and Josh, using your joint card to pay for some appointments. We have sufficient evidence for your case. Mark stared at the pictures, feeling the pain slowly turning to rage. What now? He asked, looking up at Patrick. Now, Mark, you decide how to proceed. You have all the cards in your hand. Mark silently gathered up the papers and headed home. He knew that this was only the beginning of what was to come. Mark spent the entire next day in suspense. Sarah was cold and detached again, as if she was in another world, although her attempts to appear casual became increasingly strained. Mark only watched her in silence, noting every little detail, the way her hand shook as she picked up her cup of coffee, the way she avoided looking him in the eye. He knew the end was near, and now all that was left was to put the pieces together. Patrick was as precise as a clock. Within hours of their meeting, he sent Mark a whole package of evidence. photos of Sarah's meetings with Eric and Josh, hotel statements taken over the past few months. Even financial statements with suspicious expenses Mark did not know about were included in the dossier. After gathering all the data, Mark sat at the desk in the office he usually went into to get a little distraction after work. This place was now the headquarters of his personal operation. He studied every picture, every report, piecing together the whole picture. "You relayed again?" He heard Sarah's voice behind him. She stood in the doorway, shrouded in penumbra. Her gaze was wary, but there was no hint of suspicion in it. "Yes, there is a lot of work to do," Mark answered, closing the file and trying to keep his voice natural. "And you?" "Same." Sarah shrugged and moved closer. "You know, we have not spent time together in a while. Why don't we have dinner tomorrow night? I'd like to cook something special." Her voice was almost soft, and Mark felt a flicker of pain inside him for a moment. She could talk as if nothing had happened, as if he was the same Mark she knew before all the meetings and lies. "Good idea," he replied, looking her straight in the eye. Sarah smiled slightly, as if she had not expected that answer. She leaned over and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before heading into the bedroom. As soon as the door closed behind her, Mark exhaled, feeling the tension slowly release his shoulders. He glanced at his phone where a message from Patrick flashed, gathered additional material, checked hotel records, and confirmed total spending. Awaiting confirmation on next step. Mark knew it was time to act. He dialed Patrick's number. "Patrick, it's Mark. Moving forward. I need final confirmations tomorrow morning, including pictures of the meeting with Josh." "Will do. As soon as I get the pictures, I'll send them to you right away," the detective replied. His voice was confident, like it was a normal work day. The next day, Sarah left for work, leaving Mark home alone. He brewed himself a strong cup of coffee and started checking his mail. Inside was a report from Patrick with pictures attached. They showed Sarah and Josh sitting in a secluded corner of the restaurant, her hand resting on his, their faces close and their expression full of trust. Mark could no longer turn away from the truth. She had betrayed him twice, and each time with a different tactic. Later that afternoon, Mark called Chris. His friend's voice was chipper, but you could hear the concern in it. "Hi, Mark. Is everything okay?" Tom asked, sensing a note of tension in his voice. "Tom, we need to meet. It's urgent." Mark tried to speak calmly, but his voice gave him away. "Sure, come over. Meg's made lunch. You're welcome to join her." "I'll be there in an hour," Mark replied, glancing at the evidence folder. The atmosphere at Tom's house was cozy. Meg was friendly and smiling as always, but quickly noticed that something was wrong with Mark. "Hey, Mark, come on in. Everything all right?" She frowned slightly as he walked in. "Yeah, I just need to talk to Tom," he replied with a strained smile. Tom was waiting for him in the study he always used as a workspace and reading area. Mark closed the door behind him and pulled out a folder. "Tom, this is not going to be an easy conversation," Mark began, opening the folder and placing it on the desk. Tom silently leaned over and began to look through the documents. His face expressed bewilderment at first, then fury. "Sarah and Eric?" He raised his eyes in disbelief. "And someone else?" "Josh," Mark said with difficulty. "I found correspondence and evidence. They used our mutual money to meet and spend time together." Tom sighed heavily, sat back in his chair, and wrapped his arms around his head. "Damn it, Mark. I did not know." His voice shook as he spoke. "What are you going to do?" "I've already started the process." It's not just about getting a divorce. Mark looked at his friend with determination. It's about making her realize that every action she takes has consequences. "You want me to help?" Tom met his gaze, a genuine willingness to support in his eyes. "No, just be there for me when it starts." Mark nodded gratefully. Tom stood up and clapped Mark on the shoulder. "You're stronger than most of us, friend." The evening was quiet. The usual dinner time had become a ritual of pretense and tense silence. Sarah, sitting at the table, was languidly picking at her pasta with her fork, her gaze wandering somewhere far beyond the kitchen. Mark, on the other hand, was as focused as a predator waiting for the moment to strike. He studied her facial expressions, caught the smallest changes in her behavior, and wondered how she would react if she knew that his plan was coming to fruition. "You've been quiet all day," Sarah said, breaking the long silence. Her voice trembled, as if she was not sure if she should start talking. "Thinking," Mark answered, keeping his eyes on his plate. "About us." She tensed, but tried to hide it by taking a sip of water and looking away. "Do not you think we deserve a little time to ourselves?" She continued, smiling strangely. "Why not we go to the lake like we used to? Just you and me." Mark looked up, scrutinizing her face. He saw the way her gaze searched his for a reaction, the way her lips tightened slightly in anticipation of a response. "That sounds interesting," he said, giving her the illusion of control. Sarah seemed to relax, her smile becoming more genuine. But inside Mark was already simmering with preparations for the next step. He knew the days ahead would be hard, but the goal was worth the effort. The next day, while Sarah was at work, Mark called Patrick. "Patrick, I'm ready. I'll send the materials to be handed over today." "Good," the detective replied. "The report for her work is also almost ready. Everything will go according to plan." Mark ended the call and gathered the papers. Photos of Sarah's meetings with Eric and Josh, statements of spending on joint accounts, messages he decopied from her phone. He scanned them to email. The first batch went to the law firm Patrick had recommended. The rest he prepared to send to Eric's wife, Rebecca. Later that evening, Sarah came home earlier than usual. She walked into the living room holding a bag of organic produce and a bottle of wine. "I thought we could spend a night together," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "I bought your favorite red." "How nice," Mark replied, studying her as she set the bag on the table and pulled out the groceries. Her hands were still trembling slightly, and he knew that cracks were beginning to appear in her world. The evening passed in a strange harmony. Sarah talked about work, about coworkers, about project discussions. She played her part to the end, as if nothing was happening. But Mark noticed the little things, the look that became distracted when her phone lit up, the tense fingers when she looked away to read a message. A fire was starting in her world, and she knew it. The next morning, as Sarah left for a meeting, Mark received a text from Patrick. Eric's wife received the materials, and it has resonated. Awaiting her reaction. Also check the messages sent to Sarah's work. Awaiting confirmation. Mark smiled slowly, feeling each puzzle take its place. He knew Eric would be furious and Sarah would panic, but that was only the first part. He wanted each of them to feel what betrayal and hopelessness felt like. In the evening, Sarah came home with red eyes, as if she had recently cried. She tried to mask her emotions with a strained smile. "Is everything okay?" Mark asked, feigning concern. "Yeah, it has been a rough day," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Nothing important." But Mark knew that was a lie. An hour later her phone rang, and she retreated to the bedroom to answer it. He stood in the hallway, stealthily moving closer to eavesdrop. "I have no idea where it came from," Sarah spoke softly, panic audible in her voice. "No, I cannot leave anything behind. Eric, you have to understand. It was not me. Someone was following us." Mark walked back into the living room and sat down while a satisfied confidence swelled within him. The plan had worked, and now her world was crumbling, exposing all her lies. The morning began with a silence so deafening that Mark was even surprised at how unusual it was in their house. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her face tired, her eyes reddened with tears. She seemed to avoid looking at Mark, busy mechanically stirring a cup of tea. Time seemed to stand still between them, as if playing a dangerous game of who would be the first to break the silence. Mark sat down across from her, placing a folder of papers on the table. Her gaze flickered to her, then immediately averted. Silence filled the kitchen again. "We need to talk, Sarah," Mark began calmly, folding his hands in front of him. "About what?" she replied, trying to make her voice firm, but her tone was too harsh to deceive him. "About the fact that you've been walking around for weeks? About the fact that I know what you redoing? About what you re-hiding?" His voice was flat, without a trace of emotion. Sarah dropped her spoon, and it hit the cup with a clinking sound. She looked up at him, and something between panic and pleading flashed in her gaze. "Mark, it is not what you think, not what I think." He raised an eyebrow, slightly and slowly opened the folder. You think I did not know about you and Eric? About you and Josh? About the spending you covered up with our joint card? I know all of that, Sarah. She went pale, as if all the words had vanished from her memory, leaving only wordless surprise. Yeah. Her voice trembled. I can explain everything. No, Sarah, he interrupted her, not giving her a chance to speak again. There is nothing more to explain. Everything I needed to know, I've already found out. Mark pulled photos, correspondence, printouts of bank statements out of a folder and slowly laid them out in front of her. Sarah looked at them, and her face contorted with shame and fear. Mark, please, She did not finish. The words stuck in her throat, as if the air was suddenly too heavy to speak. Did you think I would not recognize? That you could fool me for months, and just believe it was just another rough patch? Mark stood up, walking around the table and looking down at her. I gave you a chance to tell the truth, but you chose to play these games with me. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the pictures Patrick had taken. It captured her meeting Eric at a cafe table, their heads tilted close, faces lit up with a sly smile. It was a mistake, she whispered, not taking her eyes off the photograph. I lost myself, Mark. I was looking for something that was missing. What was missing? There was sarcasm in his voice. And you decided to look for it in two men at the same time? Sarah closed her eyes, holding back the tears that were beginning to run down her cheeks after all. I thought I could stop it. Her voice shook like an autumn leaf in the wind. But then it was too late, he finished her sentence. Because now it would all come out. The moment he said it, Sarah's cell phone, lying on the table, began to vibrate. She flinched, looked at the screen, and turned even paler. Who is it? Mark asked sharply, even though he already knew the answer. She did not answer. Her eyes darted between the phone and Mark as she slowly picked it up and read the message. Mark stepped closer, looking over her shoulder. We're in trouble. Rebecca found out everything. Call me urgently. Mark straightened, his gaze icy. So Rebecca already knows, he said quietly. Your sweet Eric would not be able to hide it for long. Sarah set the phone down on the table as if there was a fire coming from it that could burn her. She covered her face with her hands, and her body shook with silent sobs. You do not understand what this means, Mark, she whispered through her fingers. It's over. My job, my life, it's what you chose, Sarah. His voice was cold, without a shred of sympathy. I tried to save our marriage, but you ruined it yourself. Mark turned away and headed for the door to leave the room. He stopped on the threshold without turning around. Tomorrow you'll be served with divorce papers. I've already sent them to the court. Get your things together. You would not be staying here for long. He heard her sobs intensify, but he did not turn around. This was her cross, and now she had to carry it herself. Mark left for his study, closing the door behind him. The silence of the house, broken only by Sarah's muffled sobs, was pressing on his ears. He sank heavily into his chair, feeling the fatigue of the last few weeks wash over him. All the effort, the doubts, the nightly hours of tracking and preparation, it had all finally come to fruition. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but right now there was a strange emptiness in his soul, making room for a new reality. An hour later, the phone vibrated on the desk. A message from Patrick. Rebecca has filed for divorce. Eric is furious. Details will be in tomorrow. Mark allowed himself a brief smile. It was confirmation that the truth had made its way out after all. Sarah could no longer hide behind lies and manipulation, and her environment was beginning to crumble like a house of cards. Later that night, when night had already tightly embraced the city, Sarah walked to Mark's office door and knocked. The knock was faint, hesitant. Mark did not immediately respond, but with a sigh, he called out nonetheless. Come in. Sarah entered, her face pale, her eyes inflamed and empty. She was nothing like the woman he had once loved, confident, cheerful, mesmerizing. A stranger stood before him, haggard and desperate. Yeah, I have nothing to say to fix this, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were freezing. Mark remained silent, crossing his arms over his chest. An awkward silence hung in the room. Did you think I would not notice? He finally asked, his voice calm but steeled. That idea, you just ignore it? No, she answered, lowering her eyes. I knew you'd find out. I was just hoping that I could end it before things got out of hand. Mark grinned, but the laugh was devoid of joy. Finish it, he repeated. Sarah, you've been lying to me every minute. What finish? She did not answer, and the room fell into silence again. Sarah flinched when the muffled sound of a car outside the window and looked away sharply, as if she were about to run away. It's Rebecca, is not it? Mark finally figured it out. She probably wants to know how you let this happen. Or maybe Josh. He is not going to be happy when he realizes it. Either, is he? Sarah closed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped even lower. I've already lost everything I could, she said, in a voice that sounded almost indifferent. You were the only thing I did not want to lose, but that has happened now. Mark looked at her, and a shadow of regret flickered inside him, but it quickly disappeared. You lost me the moment you decided to go down that path, Sarah. Now all you have to do is accept that and move on. Sarah stood in the study, her eyes staring at the floor and her shoulders shaking. She realized that all excuses were over and there were no more words left to make up for what had happened. Mark watched her, feeling his own pain begin to give way to a cold calm. He knew this was the moment when his life would begin to change, and there would be no going back. I'll pack my things tomorrow, Sarah said quietly, wiping the tears from her face. I'll go to my sister's until I find a place to live. Mark nodded, not showing an ounce of pity. She left the study, and silence filled the house again. He was left alone, surrounded by the memory of their long years together, now wrapped in a series of false memories. The next morning, Sarah really started packing. Every step she took around the house echoed with a sound that no longer seemed painful to Mark. He watched her from afar, remembering all the times they had laughed together, planned for the future, shared dreams. Those memories no longer brought joy. They were just a reminder that life could change in an instant. At one point, Sarah approached him, holding an old photograph of them smiling together on the beach. Her gaze was full of regret. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling. I know I do not deserve it, but no matter what, I want you to know that it was real once. Mark was silent, his eyes remaining fixed. He took the photograph and stared at it for a long time before he put it down on the table. Perhaps it once was, he finally answered. But that time has passed, Sarah. We both have to accept that. She nodded, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving the door ajar behind her. An hour later, her car was pulling out of the driveway, and Mark could hear the last traces of her being here dissolving into the distant noise of the street. Several months passed. Mark lived alone, slowly recovering from the storm that had blown through his life. He spent a lot of time with friends, especially Tom and Meg, who supported him in his most difficult moments. One day at a New Year's Eve party, he met Laura, a friend of Meg's whom they had known for a long time, but had never interacted closely. Laura was smart, open, and considerate, and conversations with her were as light as a cool summer breeze. They began to see each other more often, first in the company of mutual friends, and then alone. Mark felt himself gradually letting go of the past and opening up to the new. His life was no longer soaked in bitterness and pain, but instead was filled with hope. One evening, Laura invited him for a walk in the park. The snow lay quietly on the ground, the light of the street lamps reflected in her eyes. You know, she said, lightly touching his arm, I've always thought that a man's strength lies in his ability to endure hardship. And looking at you, I realized that you were stronger than many people could be in your place. Mark smiled, feeling truly at ease for the first time in a long time. I realized one thing, Laura. Difficulties do not define us. They only reveal to us what we can become. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.